John Anderson, the managing exec for Sanlam Corporate Investments, joins me now on EBnet stream. John, welcome and thanks for joining me.
No, thanks, Leon. Great to be here.
So, John, we're not talking to you in your role at Sanlam today, but rather in your role as the chairperson of the Actuarial Society of South Africa's, how do you call it, Sustainability and Climate Committee. And recently you guys launched the Climate Index. So I have a very pointed question for you, John.
Yes.
Is this the effort of actuaries to make actuarial science sexy again?
So, well, I think the short answer is yes, but it's with a purpose. So maybe we could just go back, and what we realized as the Actuarial Society is that there's a lot of long-term systemic issues that'll have a major impact over the next few decades on society and also on the financial services industry. And climate change is one of those. As a result, we established the ASSA Sustainability and Climate Committee. And one of the key projects that we identified quite early on was we need to create essentially a database that tracks climate change in South Africa over time that can be used in the financial services industry for things like setting your mortality assumptions, setting assumptions for healthcare, areas that are potentially at risk in terms of insurance for your short-term insurance, where there'll be more catastrophes, etc. And then also for investments, where you're most exposed. And it's on the back of that that we put together a team together with academics to create this, what's called the ASSA Climate Index. And yes, it is quite sexy, but it's not for its it has a real purpose, and the purpose is to have a database that you can use to inform practitioners on how to price risk in terms of climate change, and also start putting in place steps on how to change that. And that's really where it came from, and it was recently launched.
So if I may, I just want to go back one step. Not everyone yet buys into the concept of climate change, and that it's nothing more than just normal course of events that's taking place across the world. Trump refers to it as the great green hoax or whatever. So there's a lot of varied opinions going about. So for people to adopt things like your climate index, there has to be a certain belief that there's a need in that regard. I'm not expressing a personal opinion. I believe that climate change is real. But what is your retort to the non-believers around the need in our financial services industry to have a tool like this?
Sure. Look, and yeah, we get that a lot. So the thing is, I mean, you can't ignore science. So, yes, you can have a view as a politician or say various things, but you then have to back it up with fact, right? So the fact is, the climate has been changing over the last number of decades. It's a fact. It is measurable. You can see it, and there's no conspiracy theories behind that. And there's also scientists globally, as a profession, has agreed that climate change is happening. And we are, for example, 2024, fact, it was declared as the hottest year, and on record since measurement began in the pre-industrial era. And also, it's a fact that carbon emissions in the atmosphere create what's called the greenhouse effect. And also that has been the main driver of this heating that's happened over the last number of decades. Yes, there are periods where there's more or less heating based on the natural systems that you have, like the El Nino and all of those things. But the trend has been over the last few decades heating, and it is accelerating as such. So the science is clear. There is global heating. there, and it's on the back of carbon emissions, and you can't get away from that. I think where there's a difference of opinion is where that will end, how much heating there will be. Unfortunately, that's a huge range. There's lots of uncertainty as to that. The other where there's different views is whether you should A, do anything about it, assume that humans will just adapt as we have, for a long time, or whether there will be future innovation that will help us, and we hope that becomes there. But the reality is the science is clear. Global warming is real. Also, because of that, it's also changed as a knock-on effect, and there's also knock-on effect with things like increasing frequency of severe weather and the severity of that. And even in the climate index that we've created with academics, if you go back to the database, you can see that over the last number of years, there's been more frequent events, and they've been more severe. You just have to look at the KZN flooding that's happened. And yes, some of it is natural and would have happened by itself in normal course of events, but the global warming has amplified that. And there has already been scientific reports to quantify how much of the change is as a result of human intervention. So yeah, science is
So I
quite
think
clear about this. Yeah.
So I think to bring it back to first principles a little bit for those people who aren't, call it either financial or a climate change experts, you take something like the Natal flooding that you mentioned. I think the cost, I sometimes get the number wrong, was 50 billion or even more to our economy, which ultimately hits us all in the pocket in some way. Let alone the loss of life that took place. Now, those things are natural; they're going to happen over time, but they seem to be happening more and more frequently
Correct. Yeah.
as the temperatures are rising and you're getting more of those extremes. So that's the impact on us as individuals within the societies within which we live. This index now, what does the index tell us, and who is it then appropriate to? Is it appropriate to the parties like the insurers or the asset managers to do what with ultimately, and what would that impact be back to me as a consumer in the market?
No, look, I think those are good points. So let's go back to what is the climate index, the ASSA Climate Index. So basically, what it is it tracks extreme climate events across South Africa specifically, and using high resolution data. So you can actually then drill into specific regions in South Africa to see where there's been changes. It measures specific things. It measures extreme maximum temperatures, extreme minimum temperatures, precipitation, so i.e. where you have potential risk of flooding, and then also drought. And then we also combine it into a composite index that weights across those four areas. Now, the data goes back to 1991, just because of the availability of the databases. So it's a quantitative tracking of climate change in those four areas and a composite. But very important, it tracks extremes over time. And then it standardizes it. So in statistical speak, it kind of normalizes it. So the minute you get more than a 1 or 2 standard deviation, meaning an extreme outcome, it then tracks it. And what we are seeing in practice is over the last number of years, more extreme events, and when they're happening, more severe. So its use case is for a number of stakeholders. So as you mentioned, it affects people. So if you're in a specific region that is going to experience more and more flooding, how bad can it get? For areas that are not yet experiencing that are expected to experience it in the next 10 years, it helps you understand that. You can prepare for it. It helps government because they can plan infrastructure, protect things, especially in regions that maybe there's sea level rises or flooding or things like drought. Start preparing for it, like in the Western Cape. You need to get proper long-term solutions because drought is going to become more frequent, more severe, and we know that we're in a water-stressed area. And then also getting people to understand extreme temperatures. You know, you're at risk of, especially for older individuals, um, you see an increased number of deaths at extreme temperatures. So start, you know, avoiding those times of the day. Make sure you do all the right precautions. But more importantly, okay, this has an economic impact. So for insurers, this index is very important. So let's start with short-term insurers. Short-term insurers are insuring you against the risk of when flooding happens, that they can pay for your house, your car, all of those types of things. They need to be able to price that risk and also spread that risk across, you know, through reinsurance agreements, etc. More importantly, if they also need to know which areas may become uninsurable. So, you know, for example, the fires that were spread in Los Angeles recently, a lot of those areas are actually uninsurable. So those people had no insurance because it's become unaffordable. So the insurance industry needs it to preempt that, but also get policyholders prepared for it, price appropriately, and give proper products, you know, for that. The life insurance industry, it actually in the short term affects people's health. So things like flooding also have knock-on effects, you know, in terms of spreading of disease, insects, you know, those types of things. But extreme heat over time can also, you know, and also extreme temperatures, also maximum and minimum, can affect mortality in different ways. So when you're pricing for a pensioner outsourcing, for example, how are you factoring that into that? If you're a medical scheme, how are you pricing it into the medical premiums that you're charging? On the asset management side, this is also where it becomes quite important because these extreme things, if they happen more often and more severe, they can affect your value chains. So the KZN one that you mentioned, companies shut down. Companies that were there for 100 years shut down, finished. And it's because their supply chain was disrupted. They couldn't get the products from the warehouse. And on the back of COVID, there was also stress in the system. And people lost their jobs. But also anybody invested in those businesses lost returns. So it can affect the returns in your portfolio. Um, So, you know, coastal areas, if there's coastal flooding and you've got a very expensive property portfolio, as an example, that can have an impact. But also if you start seeing shifts of people moving from an area that's not easy to live in anymore, and then you get ghost towns, that can also, affect you. So it has multiple uses for asset managers, retirement funds, long-term insurance. To end it off is for retirement funds, we did some work in the long run at extreme levels of risk. Your returns are actually reduced, especially bonds, interestingly, not so much for various reasons. But to the extent that you're invested in equities in regions that are very affected, your replacement ratio can reduce from 75%, which is what you're trying to target, down to 25. And that's not, far-fetched unless we intervene to address this.
Okay, so I want to come back to that, but you were talking about the insurers. So immediately I was thinking, putting my skeptic's hat on, right, my premiums are going up. Is that the consequence? I mean, that's how people might see it, is it's all good and well. Now the already wealthy insurers are just going to price this in to protect themselves. Sorry for being a skeptic, but it's a question that needs to be.
Yes, I think from an insurer point of view, if you look at it from the insurer's point of view, they would want to protect the balance sheet from that. But also, I think it's to come up with new products and ways to try and help people mitigate the effect of that. A very important part is to start preempting. So if you know that you're in a high risk area, okay, to prevent premiums from going up, if you can get people at their houses to reinforce, to become more flood proof and address various things, it means that the premiums don't have to go up. So a big part of it actually is to identify preemptive measures to avoid that from happening. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
Also, and that applies to healthcare, life insurance, and short term. Unfortunately, though, the extreme event is where an area becomes uninsurable, and you want to kind of avoid that. But that can only be done if all the parties globally have a concerted effort to minimize the effect. Otherwise, certain areas will become unlivable, you know.
Yeah, but I think what's important, the reason I asked the question is that the skeptic will look at it that way. But if insurers get hit by unexpected claims, severe claims coming through, it's going to hit everyone's premiums um, at some point in
Yes.
the future. So rather, as you say, preempt, understand, price accordingly in the relevant risk areas, and develop products to help, and let
Yes.
the then natural market forces take account. So it's not a case of upping the price, it's a case
No.
of pricing appropriately in order to keep the entire environment sustainable, essentially,
And
from
make
that
sure that
perspective.
there's mitigation, that we can do what we can do to avoid. The key thing is to avoid it. But also remember, on the other side is a lot of us, all anybody that's in a retirement fund is an investor in financial services companies. A large portion of your portfolio is there. If those companies are hit with, things and they go under, your investments go under. So, as a shareholder, you would want this to be addressed as well. So you've got to balance all these stakeholders' needs to make, as you say, make sure it's more sustainable.
Hiya pals, greetings from Sammy. EBnet is proud to bring you top quality content from experts across the financial services industry in South Africa and internationally for free. Your support helps us in doing this. All we ask is that you subscribe to our channel by clicking the subscribe button below. Share this video with others you think will benefit from it. And give us a thumbs up if you are enjoying the content. That way you help us help you. Thank you from the team at EBnet. For more great content, please visit www.ebnet.co.za. Ciao, ciao, and bye-bye.
So moving on to the asset management side, which has always been closer to my heart, is that, and maybe it has developed over the last couple of years, but I'm not always convinced that an asset manager knows how to assess climate risk within its investee companies that it has. And if it asks the questions of the management of those companies, I'm not convinced they know how to actually price in either their move to net zero over time, or to actually price what their current carbon footprint is within their business. So this index, I'm assuming, helps an asset manager say, right, this business is in a particular place, these are the risks around it, and therefore it empowers them to ask better questions of the management of those companies around what their mitigation is, are they aware of these kind of risks, and so on.
Yes. Look, I think we've come a long way. So you are right. I think a lot of asset managers have struggled in terms of how do we quantify and how do we look at the companies that we're investing in, or in the investments, and what are the climate risks associated with that. So the climate index can help with that in terms of what we term as physical risk. Physical risk being, as climate change happens, it affects your portfolio. And for example, property will be hit with more extreme weather events if it's in a risky area, etc., etc. It can affect your portfolio if you're heavily invested in insurance companies and they don't address, what we mentioned there. So I think it can, if you have a look at your portfolio, you can create a heat map of where your investments are located. You can also start analyzing the supply chain. So where does the supply chain come from, and would the supply chain be affected, by climate change, and to what extent? So, and those are things that you could then ask of the companies you're investing, how are they planning for the future? If their business is mostly exposed because of that particular area or their supply chain, what are they doing to preempt all of that? So it's to ask better questions, more preparation, and then through that, you can then make sure that the price that you're paying for the company is reflected, the risk, and that you compensated for it, or that management is taking action, for the future. But there's other risk, which is the transition risk. That's also very important. As the world starts moving to a low carbon economy, you need to look at your portfolio that's exposed to carbon intensive industries and how it will be affected by that transition. But all of this is, I mean, that's why we developed the toolkit, the Retirement Funds and Asset Management Toolkit. There are specific metrics that you can use, tools that you could use. And I think those have developed quite nicely over the last 5 years in particular. And a lot of what we've seen is a lot of forward-looking asset managers are embedding that into their processes and looking at the risks in their portfolio, both physical and transition, and factoring it into their decision making. So we've come quite a long way in doing that.
Help us then understand. You say you've developed frameworks for retirement funds, for insurers, and so on as part of this journey that you've been on as the committee. Just give us some insight into that. So, what are these frameworks? Who are they applicable to, and what are they there to ultimately help with?
Okay. So maybe let's start with so there's two specific frameworks. So the one is for life and health insurers. And that was a framework that was created essentially by practitioners in the life insurance industry. How to embed climate change considerations into your risk management of the insurance business. So how does it help? The pricing of insurance, there's approaches set in there. How can you include, for example, this data in your experience analysis to setting premiums for life insurance? Because if you combine so if you've got now the data that's by location and how it's been changing over the last 20, 30 years, you overlay that with your mortality data, you can get insights into which areas are affected more or less by mortality. And remember, it can go either way. It doesn't mean it's always worse. What's interesting is some areas that were very cold previously that are warmer now, it becomes more livable and the mortality actually improves in that particular instance. So the point is, it's, how to do that, how to reserve, how do you bring climate change considerations into your reserving process, underwriting, and one of the factors you can now look at is your location, and based on that location, you can get a score on this climate, and then there's a different type of underwriting. So that's and there's a number of things that the committee's done there, and then an important one is the ASSA. So in the insurance industry, your own risk and solvency assessment. It's a very important tool that insurers use to make sure that they've got sufficient capital and that they can deal with extreme scenarios. The toolkit shows you how to embed that into the working of the insurance company. And there is a link that's available, to all insurers. So it's a practical toolkit made by practitioners for practitioners. And we've already seen some large insurers starting to embed that in their processes. On the retirement funds and asset management side, quite simply, we've got a toolkit that basically has a qualitative measurement. So it's like a little checklist, very simple. A lot of retirement funds have a risk framework, and you look at what are the risks, and yeah, you can identify the climate change risks. So traditionally, look at things like your admin systems, your cyber, all of those things. So in your audit and risk committee, you just have a nice new checklist for climate. What are the physical risks? Where am I exposed? What must I look at? What can the worst case scenario be? So it's a practical sheet that you can use alongside your existing. So your audit and risk committee just updates that. Then we've got quantitative tools that you can use. So at a retirement fund level, let's say your portfolio is a balanced fund. Where are your biggest physical risks? And there you can use things like climate value at risk, meaning, where are you most exposed at a 2 degrees Celsius warming 3 degrees? And what it helps you as a trustee is to say, I've got this asset class. it needs to be addressed, this property portfolio over here. The same for transition risk. Transition risk, if we move to a low carbon economy and carbon taxes get introduced, which companies will be most affected? And there are companies in South Africa that have a high carbon emission, and if that comes through, it can wipe out, their profits. You can use that to engage with your asset manager. Is it priced in? And also, are they doing the right things with the companies to address it? And then you can also look at the communication strategy for your members. I think this is one where I think not a lot of funds have done yet, because I think it's still early days, but you can do replacement ratio projections, showing people scenarios of climate change and what it could mean, to start, making sure that you get them involved, but also more importantly, do your actuarial assumptions when you do these projections. Are they reasonable, realistic, and do they reflect climate change? Because that can be a risk on the actuarial profession if not done correctly. Both those toolkits are available online. There's links to them. And it's, we're constantly trying to improve them based on feedback that we're getting. But the insurers that that have embedded this, we've had good feedback. The retirement funds that have embedded this, there are some, we've had good feedback. But it's still early days. I think that's why we're trying to create awareness, like this discussion we're having now, to encourage more of the industry to please adopt these frameworks and also give us feedback.
So look, I mean, like, as I said, it's something that's close to my heart. I actually want to propose to you we run a podcast series, because we need to unpack and get people comfortable with the concepts, because everything that I'm hearing from you in this conversation is that you're trying to provide a basis of thinking, a way of trying to assess, assist, and get thinking going in order to move in a particular direction and mitigate risk, so that we don't end up with unhappy surprises. What you're not saying is that you're in any way trying to be exclusionary of anything. And that's where sometimes we go wrong on this whole climate debate, is that we're saying all of a sudden we go from plastic straws to sloppy paper straws and no one likes it, and therefore we don't want to do it. No one's saying in South Africa right now, switch off the coal power plants, because we can't. We need those coal power plants working, otherwise our economy will suffer. But it's a case of, over the longer term, we do need to start mitigating and moving away in order to avoid these extremes. And these tools help us start thinking ultimately and planning accordingly. So I would really like to run a series like that with you, where we actually say, right, for a pension fund, this is where you can help. This is how you can look at it. These are the practical things you can do. For an asset manager, these are the things you can look at, and this is how these tools will ultimately help. So if you're interested in that, we'll be very keen to.
And that's exactly what the toolkit was, meant for. And what we can do is we can also share examples, how to use it. Absolutely does not promote exclusionary. I fully agree with you. Exclusionary investments, yes. I mean, it's a thinking that happened predominantly in the EU. But they've got different circumstances, versus in South Africa. What we can't do, though, is ignore it. So the world is moving to a low carbon economy, or at least half the world's moving and the other world is fighting against it. What you need to do is you need to say, if the world moves to low carbon economy, what does it look like? What are the risks and opportunities? There's also opportunities. We haven't talked about that on the portfolios and investments that you've got. If, however, we fail with the transition to the low carbon economy, then you must say, okay, well, in that case, the scenario is global warming. It's a high likelihood. And at this stage, that's about a 35 to 40% chance that that's the case. If that's the case, what is the implications? But it's definitely not, it's also then to understand where you've got these exposure to the coal type investments or high carbon. What are the risks and opportunities in those investments? Under both of those scenarios to run. But what we shouldn't do is ignore it. It is real. And unfortunately, it's a very complex subject. And it's something that's going to happen over the next few decades. And that's why retirement funds are very well placed. And we actually have a duty to ensure that in 40 years' time, when we look back, we took all the right actions to manage the situation, because ultimately you just want to make sure that your risk return is managed, and that also the world that you're in is livable.
So John, I had a debate with the chair of a retirement fund the other day, and he was 100% right, and it was the debate I was expecting. He said to me that their duty is to ensure that members retire comfortably, which I get. Okay, sufficient capital in order to maintain a standard of living. Okay, I said, but what about the guy that's 25 in your fund, who's only retiring in 40 years?
Correct.
If we are sitting in a situation where there's massive floods and your insurance premiums are through the roof, that guy's cost of living, his medical bills, all of that is going to be so high that it doesn't matter how much capital you give him, what's the point? So again, we have to look forward. We've got to expand a little bit in terms of, and not, you can't fix everything, but everyone's got to do something in lieu of the future ultimately.
No, and you're quite right, and it goes to the heart of fiduciary duties for trustees. And we've received legal opinion that climate change and systemic issues that affect in the long term is part of fiduciary duty, especially in the South African context, given that it's embedded in, Regulation 28, Pension Funds Act, and also just common law. Less so maybe in the US, there's other issues there, but I think for us specifically. But very importantly, it's for the different generations. And the modeling that we've done suggests that, current pensioners won't be affected as much. So, but the future generations will be affected more, and the younger you go, the more you're affected, because then the returns get affected from a financial point of view. I'm just looking at it from financial, and it's not just about livable conditions, it's just about, actual returns. And if you get to a point where everything collapses, you're also not going to have any money. And then what's the point? So we've got this delicate balance of having to manage current generation, future generations, and then we need to gradually move everything in a sustainable way, balancing all these different objectives, jobs on the one hand, future generation on the other hand. But unfortunately, that is part of trustees' duties, and there is also more cases coming about on litigation, specifically on climate change, where trustees have been found wanting globally. And if we don't do this in South Africa, trustees, there will be litigation. Yes, it'll be 30 years from now, but they'll look back and hold funds accountable, for inaction. And that's why we wanted to be proactive as the Actuarial Society to look forward and assist everybody.
And another comment that irks me is some guys will say the S in ESG is more important for us as South Africans right now. The E is not that important. I keep on saying, but guys, you can't just separate the one from the other. The one impacts on the other at the end of the day. The S impacts where people live on the side of a river. Then there's a flood and they get taken out through the flood and so on. Or a flood comes and suddenly their home gets washed away, and now it puts them in a worse or social position. I said you've got to look at these two together, and you can't you can't ignore one thing in lieu of the other. You've got to focus on both. That's the reality.
Well, that's also that's an interesting one, because you must also look at it not at a point in time, but over time. And what I mean by that is, over time, environmental issues are going to, if they continue on the trajectory that they're currently, and in certain scenarios, will reduce South Africa's GDP. Every 1% of reduction in GDP costs jobs. So yes, inaction might save a few jobs now, but if over time it costs more future jobs. So you must look at it over time, and then you must balance off, look, do you want to lose all those jobs over time? Is that worse than saving these initial jobs over here? But in reality, I think it's also a misperception. By changing, and climate change and environmental issues don't have to cost jobs. They create jobs. For example, renewable energy has created jobs. There's new innovative companies coming up. So it's, you can create jobs as well. But the main thing for me is like our modeling shows that, 1 degree of global warming can cost you at least 1% in GDP over time, probably more, but let's just say 1. And the jobs that costs you every single year in South African context is big. So the E, what I call it is it's S to the power E. Your S is amplified because of the environmental issues in South Africa. So they are integrated but amplified. So hopefully that makes sense.
I get it. So John, the all of the index information, the background testing data and so on is all available on the Actuarial Society website. Is that correct?
So there is a specific site for the climate index. You just look up ASSA Climate Index. And when you go in there, it's an interactive tool. You can play around with it. It's got a nice map, and you can also then you can show at different periods in time over the last 30 years. You can select your different measures. But if you like me and you want to play around with the data, there's a whole data sheet that you can download. We want to make the data available to everybody so that they can use it, and we promote that. There's also a section, if you're really interested in the technical details, there's a whole document setting out how the index is calculated, the technical specifications, etc. And we've tried to make it also user-friendly for everybody. And then on that site, there are links to the 2 frameworks that I mentioned earlier, the Life framework and the Retirement Funds and Asset Management framework. So please go on to look for ASSA Climate Index. On there, everything is available at your fingertips.
I'll include the link in the description on this video for anybody that wants to find it. So, John, you don't get money from the people that use this index. How have you funded the development of it? And I would also like you perhaps just to tell me who the bright young minds are that have been working on this, just so that there's some congrats to them as well.
Yes. So in terms of the index, so it was a joint effort. It is an actuarial society initiative, and given the importance of it, I think we wanted to make sure that this is looked at. But we did get a sponsor for it. So so we needed a sponsor just to make sure that we can get the academics, practitioners, and everybody involved in it to do it properly and also sustainably. Old Mutual Insure is the anchor sponsor. And for obvious reasons, Old Mutual Insure is a short-term insurance company. It's very much aligned to their business model. So it was a joint effort. We do have a sponsor. There's no money from it. It's just a sponsorship. But they also wanted a tool like this, but also wanted to make it available to the rest of the market. So not just for themselves, but the rest of the market, given that this is a team sport in climate change. It's pointless trying to do it on your own. So just in terms of people that were involved in this, we had a number of actuaries at the ASSA committee looking at this. We had Rendani, who's one of our actuaries, also in academics. He's got had many years of experience, so he was involved. Nadine was also involved constructing it. She's also an actuary at one of the practicing houses in South Africa, specializing specifically on and specializing in climate. And then we also had a Professor Landman who joined the team. So between the 3 of them, but also I think their details are also on the index pages. And also they're open to feedback from everybody to enhance it. But those are really the brains behind the whole project with the sponsorship of Old Mutual Insure.
Well, I think, John, from our side and on behalf of all the viewers, I think this is critically important that, first of all, everyone gets behind initiatives like this, but that we take it seriously and not see it as a threat, but rather as just part of our necessary evolution and a clever way of moving forward. And I congratulate you and your team for what you guys have done and for flying this flag, and to the likes of Old Mutual Insure for getting behind it, because in a competitive environment, collaborating like this is sometimes not commonplace. So it's congratulations to them for viewing things in that light as well. So on that note, again, I will be in contact to see if maybe we can help, what's the right word, create a greater awareness and understanding around how to practically utilize these kind of tools, because I'm not seeing it enough on the retirement fund side. And I do also think that the investment consulting world in South Africa needs to make itself great again. And these are the kinds of things that they should ultimately be doing. So I will be in touch and let's see what we can do on that side. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for the work you guys have been doing.
No, thanks, Leon. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, all the best. Keep well. Cheers, and
You too.